Hi there. Welcome to the story of me and you, where we believe that real stories raw, tender, and courageous are the threads that stitch us together as human beings. Today's story is not just about identity. It's about breath, about truth, about stepping into the world not as who others think you should be, but as who you've always been, deep inside. This is Eli's story. It was a gray Thursday morning in mid-March when Eli first heard his name spoken the way it always should have been, and yet, it had taken 19 years for that name to be born. Eli had once been known as Emma. In the sleepy little town of Iron Hollow, Tennessee, population just shy of 4,000 people didn't forget who you were. You grew up under the same oaks your parents did. You learned to wave at every passing car, even when you didn't know the driver. You learned early what was expected of you. Emma, daughter of the local pastor, was expected to be sweet, soft-spoken, and unquestioningly obedient. She was the pride of the congregation, leading the church choir with a voice that trembled like light. But behind closed doors, Emma rarely looked in the mirror. When she did, she barely recognized the reflection. It wasn't a hatred she felt. It was a quiet, hollow ache. A sense that somewhere inside her, someone else was trying to breathe. As a child, Emma used to sit by the window and watch the neighborhood boys tear through the dust on their bikes wild and loud, unapologetically messy. She didn't envy them. She was them. In her mind, she was one of them. But every time she tried to express it to her mother, to her Sunday school teacher, she was met with that same tight-lipped smile, that same phrase, "It's just a phase, sweetheart." But it wasn't. By the time Emma turned 19, her soul felt like it had been living in borrowed clothes. College was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to exhale. But even there, fear kept her quiet. She had traded one box for another, just with different wallpaper. That was until she met Sam. Sam was a walking contradiction. Sharp humor wrapped in deep empathy, with neon hair and eyes that made you feel seen without even speaking. Sam didn't just live out loud, they belonged out loud. One night, while lounging on the dorm floor under fairy lights and the gentle buzz of lo-fi music, Sam asked Emma a question that would split her world in two. "When was the last time you felt like you?" Emma didn't answer, not with words. Her silence was long, too long, but Sam didn't feel it. They just waited, and sometimes silence says everything. Over the next few months, Emma began to write a name she had never spoken aloud, Eli. She wrote it at the top of journal pages. She whispered it into her pillow, and every time it felt like putting on skin that finally fit. She read books. She followed trans voices online. She cried through documentaries. And slowly, she began to see herself not as broken, not as wrong, but as someone finally finding home after years of being lost in her own house. Still, the fear was enormous. Her parents, her hometown, the whispers, the way people would look at her in the grocery store. Would she be called a disgrace? A sinner? Would she lose the only life she had ever known? Then one night, Eli had a dream. In it, she stood on a platform. A train was leaving, steam hissing, and a voice called out, "Final boarding for Eli." She looked down at herself. She was holding a ticket, one she didn't remember buying. The platform began to shake, and in a heartbeat, she ran. When she woke up, her face was wet with tears. She stumbled to the mirror, gripping the sink like it might anchor her to the earth. And in a voice barely louder than breath, she whispered, "My name is Eli." It was the first time. That great Thursday in March, Sam introduced her to a new group of friends with the words, "This is Eli. He's one of us." And just like that, something inside her unlocked. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. But it was real. As real as sunlight on skin. The name fit like a long-lost melody. Eli stood at the bus station with a single backpack and a folded letter tucked deep into his coat pocket. He was going home. The same town, the same street, the same house with the chipped white fence and the porch swing that creaked even in still wind. But nothing about this return felt familiar. He was no longer Emma, and though his body looked almost the same, every cell of him buzzed with a quiet, defiant truth. As the bus rolled through the countryside, Eli pressed his forehead to the window, fields blurred by like the pages of a chapter he had just closed. The ache in his chest wasn't fear, not entirely. It was hope laced with dread, a question he couldn't stop asking. Will they see me or only what they've lost? When the bus pulled into Iron Hollow, it was dusk. The light turned the sky lavender, softening the town's edges, but nothing could soften the tightness in his gut as he stepped off the bus. His mom was waiting. She stood by the old pickup, arms crossed, eyes scanning the passengers like a mother scanning for someone she once knew. When her eyes landed on him, there was a pause, barely more than a breath, but Eli felt it. A flicker, recognition wrapped in confusion. "Emma," she said quietly. Eli walked closer, voice steady, though everything inside him trembled. "It's Eli now, Mom." Her lips parted slightly, but no words came, just a long, unreadable stare. And then, without a word, she turned and opened the passenger door. The ride home was mostly silent. Country music hummed low on the radio, the same station they used to sing along to on grocery trips. But now, even the music felt like a ghost. At dinner, his father barely looked up from his plate. "Still singing?" he asked, like that might tether things back to normal. Eli shook his head. "Not lately." His mom asked if he was eating well, if he had friends, safe housing. She avoided pronouns entirely. Eli could feel how they were trying to fold him back into the shape he had outgrown. Not out of cruelty, but from fear. Fear of change, fear of loss, fear of not knowing how to love what no longer fit their expectations. That night, Eli lay in his childhood bed, the same posters on the wall, the same books on the shelf, and felt the walls pressing in. The boy he had always been was finally alive, but he was surrounded by memories that refused to recognize him. He pulled out the letter from his pocket, the one he had written on the bus, and sent unspoken, but full of everything he couldn't yet say aloud. "Dear Mom and Dad, I'm not trying to erase Emma. I'm trying to breathe. I know this is hard. I know this isn't what you expected. But I need you to know I've never felt more like myself than I do now. Not once in all those years did I feel whole, and now that I finally do, I need you with me. Please don't mourn the child you think you've lost. I'm still here. I've just stopped pretending. Love, Eli." He folded it again and placed it on the nightstand, unsure if he'd ever find the courage to hand it to them. But he had already made one impossible step, coming home as himself. Outside the window, the wind moved through the trees like a whisper, and for the first time, even in this house of memory and silence, Eli felt the flicker of something stronger than fear. He had started to exist, not just in private, not just in dreams, but in the world he once thought would never accept him. Tomorrow, he would face more questions, more stares, more awkward pauses, and careful avoidance. But tonight, he had survived the first return, and sometimes surviving is the most radical kind of courage. Morning in Iron Hollow carried the scent of dew, pine, and fresh biscuits from someone's kitchen 3 houses down. It used to be comforting. Now it made Eli feel like a stranger walking through a photo album, everything familiar, but slightly off focus. He walked through town with his hoodie pulled up, hands tucked deep in his pockets, heart racing with every familiar face he passed. Not because he feared confrontation, but because silence could cut even deeper. At the corner gas station, a group of boys from high school leaned against a truck. One of them, Travis, used to flirt with Emma in 10th grade in that harmless, teasing way country boys did. When their eyes met now, Travis narrowed his gaze, squinting like he was solving a puzzle he didn't remember starting. "Hey," Travis called out. "You Emma's brother or something?" Eli paused. For a split second, he thought about smiling, making a joke, shrinking back into the shadows of a name he'd buried. Instead, he straightened his spine, looked Travis in the eye, and said simply, "I was Emma." The words hung in the air like fog that refused to lift. One of the other boys gave a low whistle. Another muttered something Eli didn't catch. Travis just blinked, muttered, "Damn," and turned back to his cigarette like the whole thing had never happened. Eli walked on, throat tight, not angry, just tired. Tired of being a walking question mark. Tired of being someone people felt entitled to process instead of see. That afternoon, he stopped by the library, the same place where Emma once read stories to kids every Saturday in summer. Miss Harding, the librarian, had always been kind, stern but soft around the edges. She looked up from the counter, and her face lit up for a moment until recognition flickered in. "Emma?" she asked cautiously. "Eli," he said gently. A pause, then something unexpected. She stepped around the counter and pulled him into a hug. It was brief, but real. "You've grown brave," she whispered, and then cleared her throat, returning to her usual, businesslike tone. "You'll always have a shelf card here, and you still owe me an of Green Gables. By the way," Eli laughed, "the first real one in days." It filled the quiet space between his ribs. Later that night, he sat on the front porch, the same one he used to hide under when it stormed. His mom brought out 2 mugs of chamomile tea, just like she always did during winter. She didn't say much, but she sat beside him, something she hadn't done since he came home. "Was it hard?" she asked after a long silence. Eli looked at her. Her eyes were on the stars, not on him. "It was harder pretending," he said quietly. Her hands trembled slightly as she held her cup. She didn't cry, didn't smile, but after another pause, she said, almost like a confession, "I still say she in my head." Eli nodded. "I know, it takes time." Another silence passed. This one was softer. "I'm trying," she whispered. And that was enough for now. The world hadn't changed, but Eli had. In a town where every corner whispered memories of someone he no longer was, he had started to carve space for someone new. And while some faces looked away or frowned, others like Miss Harding, like his mom, were beginning to see him. Not perfectly, not completely, but they were trying. And sometimes, trying was the first form of love. The Iron Hollow Community Center still smelled faintly of old wood floors and lemon-scented furniture polish. Nothing had changed, not the brown bulletin board lined with faded event flyers, not the squeaky folding chairs, and definitely not the people who filled them. It was the annual Spring Town Forum. The same one Eli used to attend with his parents as Emma, where folks argued about potholes and celebrated pie bake-offs with equal passion. But this year, he wasn't here just to listen. This year, he was going to be seen. Sam had texted him that morning from back in the city, showing up as the first revolution. "You've already begun." Eli had stared at those words for 10 minutes before pulling on his jacket and heading out the door. Inside the hall, his arrival did not go unnoticed. Whispers trailed him like shadows. "Is that Emma?" "No, that's... I heard she goes by a different name now. Poor Pastor Dan. Must be killing him. Shouldn't draw attention, if you ask me." Eli felt all of it, but he didn't stop walking. He found an empty seat near the side wall, planted himself down, and lifted his chin. The meeting began like every other year. A few formalities, applause for the high school debate team, a heated but good-natured argument about who'd be managing the farmers market this season. Then came the open mic section, community reflections, and that's when Mrs. Iris stood up. She was one of the town's oldest residents, a Sunday school teacher for nearly 50 years. Her voice was always sweet, but today it carried a sharpness. "I've lived in this town my whole life," she began, "and I've seen many changes, but not all change is good. There are things we've always held dear: tradition, decency, God's order. I just hope we don't lose ourselves trying to keep up with the world out there." A few heads nodded. Some eyes flicked toward Eli. His stomach tightened, his hands grew cold, but something in his chest was quiet. Steady therm refused to shrink. And then, before he fully realized what he was doing, Eli stood up. The room turned. His voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. "My name is Eli," he said. "Some of you knew me as Emma, and I know for some of you this is hard to understand. It's hard to accept, but I'm still the same person who used to help shelve books at the library. I'm still the same person who cried during every Veterans Day speech and baked lemon squares for the school fundraiser. The only thing that's changed is I've stopped hiding. Silence. Not hostile, not warm, just stand. I'm not asking you to agree with everything. I'm asking you to remember that I'm your neighbor, your friend, your family. I'm not new. I'm finally real, and I love this town, even if I'm not sure it loves me back yet. He sat down. His heart pounded so loudly he barely heard the next speaker. But then softly, slowly a hand rested on his shoulder. It was Mr. Callahan, retired math teacher, known for being blunt, not sentimental. "You've got guts, kid," he whispered. "Takes more courage than I ever had." Later that night, as Eli walked home beneath a sky full of small-town stars, he didn't feel victorious. He felt raw, like every nerve was exposed. But beneath that rawness was something else, pride. He hadn't waited for acceptance to come to him. He had walked into a room and declared himself flawed, vulnerable, worthy. The world might not change overnight, but in that room, Eli had claimed space. And sometimes, taking up space in your own life is the beginning of everything. Sunday morning came with the smell of coffee and the echo of shoes on wooden floors, sounds Eli knew too well. His father hadn't said much all week, but last night he left a short note on the kitchen counter. "Service is at 10. You're welcome." No name, no signature, just the unspoken invitation of a father trying to navigate a terrain neither of them had maps for. Eli sat in the passenger seat of the family truck in silence. His mother clutched her Bible tighter than usual. His father stared ahead, jaw set, like the road was something he could control and like everything else. As they pulled into the church parking lot, Eli's chest tightened. This was the building where he had first learned to sing, where he had memorized verses, where Emma had been praised for her grace and poise. Now, every step toward those heavy oak doors felt like walking into a storm he couldn't predict. Inside, everything looked exactly the same. The cross above the altar, the rows of padded pews, the scent of polished wood and old hymnals, familiar and painfully distant. As they entered, heads turned, some smiled politely, others gave tight nods, a few looked away entirely. Eli followed his parents to their usual pew, the second row from the front, left side, a space his body remembered even as his soul had changed shape. When the pastor stepped up to the pulpit, Eli felt his muscles brace, not because of what might be said, but because of what might not. Pastor Graham, a tall man with thinning gray hair and a voice like smooth gravel, cleared his throat. His eyes briefly flicked to Eli. "Today's message," he began, "is about grace. The grace to welcome, the grace to forgive, and the grace to grow." Eli held his breath. The sermon didn't mention him directly, but every word felt balanced on a blade. There are moments when who we thought someone was changes, and we can choose to close our doors in fear, or open our hearts in faith. There was a pause. Because church isn't a place for perfect people, it's a home for honest ones. Eli felt something shift inside himself, and maybe even in the air. His eyes burned. After the service, the congregation moved slowly, as if waiting to see who would speak first. Mrs. Talbot, who once taught Ellie's Sunday class, came forward. Her voice quivered. "You used to sing Amazing Grace so beautifully." Eli smiled gently. "It's still one of my favorites." She hesitated, then gave a quiet nod. "I'll try to remember that when I hear it next." Back home, the silence in the truck was heavier, but not hollow. His father finally broke it as they pulled into the driveway. "You were brave today," he said. "Eyes still on the windshield. I don't understand all of it, but I'm trying." Eli looked at him, surprised. It was the first real sentence from him in days. "Trying means the world to me," Eli replied, voice thick with unshed tears. His father gave a stiff nod, not ready to say more, but not walking away either. That night, Eli sat alone in his room, watching the shadows on the ceiling shift with passing headlights. He thought about that pew, about the way it held his body even after his name had changed, about the words the pastor chose and the ones he didn't, about the way grace can show up not as acceptance, but as effort. The church hadn't embraced him fully, but it hadn't shut him out. And in a world where rejection is often the loudest voice, even a door left slightly open can feel like sunlight. The coffee shop sat at the edge of town, just off Route 19. maple and mornings, small, warm, and lined with shelves of local crafts and mismatched mugs. Eli hadn't been there since high school, when he and Sophie used to split a cinnamon bun and argue about poetry. He didn't expect to see her there, but when he stepped inside, tugging off his hoodie as the cold air dissolved behind him, there she was, Sophie Green, curled up by the window, scribbling in a worn notebook, just like always. The breath caught in his chest. She looked older, sharper around the eyes, but the same quiet intensity flickered across her face. For a moment, Eli considered turning around, but then, as if pulled by something deeper than courage, he walked forward. "Hey," Sophie looked up. Her eyes widened slightly. Confusion first, then realization, then something else. Not judgment, not rejection, just memory. "Emma," she said cautiously. Eli smiled, softly. "It's Eli now." A long pause. Then Sophie blinked slowly and said, "Okay." That word, it landed like kindness, like water after a long walk through heat. She gestured toward the seat across from her. "Still like cinnamon buns?" He chuckled, easing into the chair. Always. They talked for an hour. About nothing at first: college, old teachers, the coffee shop's new owner. Then, slowly, the conversation dipped into deeper water. "I kept waiting for a text," Sophie admitted quietly. "When you left town, I thought maybe I'd done something, or that you just outgrew me." Eli stared at his hands. "I didn't know how to explain something I hadn't even admitted to myself," he said. "I was scared that if I told you who I was, I'd lose what we had." She nodded slowly, pressing her lips together. "You kinda did." The honesty stung, but it was fair. "I know," Eli whispered. "I'm sorry." Sophie looked at him, really looked. Then she reached across the table and laid her hand on his. "I missed you," she said, "and I think I'd like to get to know you again, not as Emma, but as Eli." A tear slipped down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. "I like that too." They ordered another coffee, shared a cinnamon bun, and fell into a new rhythm, not trying to rebuild the past, but to gently shape a present that could hold both of them. The past version of Eli had loved Sophie like a sister, fiercely and without condition. That hadn't changed. What had changed was the silence between them, now filled not with hiding, but with new possibility. When Eli left the shop, the late afternoon sun had turned the pavement golden. He walked slower than usual, hands in his pockets, heart heavier, but also fuller. "Some ghosts don't haunt us. They wait for us to return, ready to walk beside us once we stop running from ourselves. And sometimes, if we're lucky, they turn into friends again." Spring in Iron Hollow came, with daffodils blooming along the sidewalks and the smell of barbecues drifting lazily through backyards. People began leaving their windows open again. The world felt softer, more open. Maybe Eli was changing with the season. Or maybe, for the first time, he was finally growing into it. The invitation came by email: a town initiative called Voices of Iron Hollow, a community storytelling night, open mic style, for anyone who wanted to share something, a memory, a lesson, a piece of who they were. Sophie had forwarded it with one line: "You belong in this room." Eli read it twice before closing his laptop. He wasn't sure what scared him more, the idea of speaking or of staying silent, but something inside him whispered, maybe it's time they hear me for real. The community center was full that evening. People brought folding chairs. Kids played in the aisles. The air smelled like potluck casseroles and fresh lemonade. At the front of the room stood a small wooden podium and a single microphone. Names were called one by one. A high school senior read a poem about losing her grandmother. A farmer spoke about drought and gratitude. A veteran shared his letter to a son he hadn't seen in years. Then they called. Next up, Eli Warren. A beat of silence followed. Whispers floated. Some people straightened in their seats. Others froze. Eli walked slowly to the front, heart pounding in his chest like it might burst through his ribs. He gripped the sides of the podium to steady his hands. "I used to live in this town under a different name," he began. "Some of you knew me then. Some of you don't recognize me at all now. And that's okay, because I'm here not to erase who I was, but to honor who I've become." His voice shook, but not from fear, from truth. For years, I carried a name and a life that never felt like mine. I smiled when I was supposed to, sang the right songs, wore the right clothes. But every day, I felt like I was disappearing a little more. He paused. People were listening, really listening. Coming back here was the hardest thing I've ever done, because I didn't know if I'd be welcomed or warned away. But what I've found between the quiet stares and awkward pauses are moments. Small, human moments. A neighbor holding the door, a teacher remembering my voice, a friend offering me a second beginning. I'm not here to be brave. I'm here to be honest. And maybe, if someone out there is sitting in silence, feeling unseen, I hope my voice helps you find yours. He stepped back. Silence. Then soft applause. Then louder. And then, from the back of the room, Mr. Callahan stood and clapped, followed by Sophie, followed by Miss Harding, then his mother. Eli blinked fast, willing the tears to stay in, but they came anyway. After the event, strangers came up to shake his hand. A teenage boy quietly asked him if it hurt to be different. An older woman said, "My granddaughter's trans. She lives in Boston. I miss her. Maybe I need to stop waiting for her to call me." That night, walking home under the shimmer of porch lights and moonlight, Eli felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not survival, not fear, belonging. You can live years in silence, thinking you're alone. And then one day, you speak and someone listens. And suddenly, the world begins to echo back. We see you. You matter. You're home. Eli sat on the hood of his dad's old truck as the last traces of golden light spilled over Iron Hollow. The town hadn't changed much in the months since he returned. The roads still cracked in the same places. The porch lights still flickered on at exactly 7 p.m. The church bell still rang twice every Sunday. But something had shifted and it wasn't the town. It was him. There were still moments of ache. Still days where he questioned if all this coming out, coming home, coming into being had been worth the pain. There were still people who wouldn't meet his eyes. Still whispers he caught when his back was turned. But now, the difference was this. He no longer shrank to make them comfortable. He had learned to stand in his truth without apology. He had stopped asking for permission to exist. Earlier that day, Eli had been asked to speak again, this time not at an open mic, but at the high school's Diversity and Inclusion Day. Standing behind the podium, looking out at rows of young faces, he remembered what it felt like to be 16, sitting in those very same chairs, wondering if anyone else in the world felt like they were wearing the wrong name, the wrong skin, the wrong life. So he spoke not just about being transgender, but about being human. No one else gets to define your belonging. Not your school, not your church, not your parents. You don't owe anyone the version of yourself that keeps them comfortable. But you do yourself the truth. And when the assembly ended, a girl with blue-dyed hair slipped him a note folded 3 times over. On it, in careful handwriting, it said, "Thank you for making me feel less alone. I'm not ready yet, but now I know I will be someday." Eli kept the note in his wallet, not as proof, but as a reminder that his voice mattered. That presence real, raw, honest presence can be someone else's permission slip to hope. That night, back at the house, his father joined him on the truck hood. Neither said anything for a while. Finally, his father broke the silence. "You're stronger than I ever was at your age," he said, eyes fixed on the darkening horizon. "You didn't run away from yourself." Eli glanced sideways. "I almost did, 100 times, but you didn't," his dad replied. "That matters." And somehow, in that quiet exchange, Eli felt a new kind of peace settle into his bones. Not a finish line, but a moment of stillness after the storm. The kind of peace that says, you've made it far enough to rest for now. A message to you, the ones still listening. If you're hearing this, maybe you're where Eli once was, sitting in silence, carrying a name that doesn't feel like yours. Worry your truth will break the world you've built around you. And maybe it will. But maybe, just maybe, it will build something better. You don't have to roar. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be real. Because someone, somewhere, is waiting for your story to find the courage to speak their own. Let your existence be the mirror someone else needs. And if no one said it to you yet, We see you. You belong. You're already enough. This was the story of me and you. But mostly, it was yours all along.